This is the first president in 7 presidencies that actually did something about the thorn that constantly came after us. And now you criticizing and you say it's illegal? It's not. This same authorization is the same authorization that Democrats and Republican presidents in the past have used. And thank God we had a president with a backbone to finally get rid of this murderous regime. And now we're complaining about it? Remember, legally, he has to respond to Congress or inform Congress in 48 hours. That has happened. And then within 60 to 90 days, he needs to inform Congress if we're going to war and ask for specific war authorities. But the president, through Article 2, clearly has an obligation and the powers under the Constitution to defend our interest home and abroad. And there is no question he's defending our interest.
A United States senator stood up in a hearing and accused the president of violating the Constitution on war powers. What happened next was not a debate. It was a complete dismantling, point by point, precedent by precedent, with receipts going all the way back to 1979. Stay until the end, because the history Mullin laid out in that room changes the entire argument.
It is very clear for the reason for congressional approval. If you look at the debate during the Constitutional Convention, our founders were very clear that having unconditional power for a president to go into war was a power too great. It reminded them of the king that they had just defeated in the Revolutionary War, and believed that the People's House, the Congress, in Article 1 of the Constitution, should have that power to declare war and to bring those powers into play. Now, I want to be clear, Iran is a bad actor, and we must ensure that they never, ever produce nuclear weapons. But I also want to be clear, we should remember that we had a diplomatic agreement with Iran on nuclear proliferation, and President Trump withdrew from that agreement during his first term without a plan, and he was basically playing politics. I get it. But now he's sending U.S. forces back to the Middle East to fight in a war without the support of Congress and without the support of the American people. And that's why the administration must immediately seek congressional approval to make clear to not just to Congress, but more importantly to the American people, that there's an actual end goal and there's an actual strategy to ensure that what he is doing there actually protects our homeland security as opposed to endangering it.
Senator Mullin.
Thank you, Chairman. I just feel like I need to respond to some things that the senator was bringing up by accusing the president of pulling out of a nuclear deal in his first term. It was a horrible deal. It was a disastrous deal. It was a deal that we all know that would originally allow Iran to be able to have enrichment to the grade that they could make a nuclear weapon. And then for the senator that was saying that the president needs to come back for reauthorization, I don't remember him saying anything in 2016 when Barack Obama at the time dropped 26,000 bombs in Syria, Pakistan, Libya, just to name a few. And I definitely don't remember my colleagues in 2013 at all complaining about the president then Barack Obama, going into Syria. And I would like to ask the question then, what threat did Syria have to the United States? What threat did Libya have to the United States during the Arab Spring, to which these leaders were removed? And then I would ask the question, what threat did Iran have to us? Do we really need to talk about it? Do we need to talk about how many times they've killed thousands of Americans since 1979, from the first time they took hostages in November of 1979 to the last time they attacked us in June of 2025? And anybody wants to doubt that they were a threat to us, an essential threat to us? Does anybody doubt on that side of the aisle, does anybody doubt that Iran, if or when they got a nuclear weapon, would deliver it to the United States if they have capabilities of doing it? Does anybody deny that the fact that the president was being proactive on an adversary that has been chanting death to America since 1979? Does anybody deny that Iran was a threat to us and our service members? Or do we have to remind you how many they've injured and killed through their proxies and through direct action? This is the first president in 7 presidencies that actually did something about the thorn that constantly came after us. And now you criticizing and you say it's illegal? It's not. This same authorization is the same authorization that Democrats and Republican presidents in the past have used. And thank God we had a president with a backbone to finally get rid of this murderous regime. And now we're complaining about it? Remember, Legally, he has to respond to Congress or inform Congress in 48 hours. That has happened. And then within 60 to 90 days, he needs to inform Congress if we're going to war and ask for specific war authorities. But the president, through Article 2, clearly has an obligation and the powers under the Constitution to defend our interest home and abroad. And there is no question he's defending our interest. No question. So what is this grandstanding about? Do you think we should have let the Ayatollah in place? Do you think he was a good guy? Are you defending the Ayatollah now? Or aren't you glad that America finally stood up and took care of this murderous regime that's been sponsoring terror around the world for 47 years? How about we say thank you, Mr. President, for finally getting rid of this nuisance, this murderer, this sponsor of terror? He did the world a favor, and the world is a safer place because of it. You may disagree with a lot of his actions. You may disagree with some of his policies, but you can't deny that this was a threat and an essential growing threat to the United States. And you want to say he's playing politics and you get the politics behind it, Mr. Peters? You guys are playing politics. You guys are the ones that are grandstanding. The president's doing his job as commander-in-chief. And I think at one time or next, we should say thank you. Thank you for being a strong leader. But there's no way in God's green earth you guys can ever give the president, at least President Trump, any credit.
When a senator makes a constitutional argument in a public hearing, there is an expectation that the argument is grounded in the actual text and the actual history of the document being cited. Senator Gary Peters came to that hearing prepared to make the case that the president overstepped his authority by taking military action without a formal declaration from Congress. It was a serious charge and it deserved a serious response. Senator Markwayne Mullin gave him one. What unfolded was not a partisan shouting match. It was a systematic walk through American military and legal history that exposed a significant gap between the argument Peters was making and the reality of how war powers have functioned under every president for the past several decades regardless of party. Peters invoked the founders. He invoked the Constitutional Convention. He made the argument that the framers, having just defeated a king, were determined to ensure that no single executive would have unconditional power to take the country to war. That is a historically accurate observation about the founders' intent. It is also an argument that has been selectively applied by members of both parties for as long as anyone currently serving in the Senate has been alive. Mullin pointed that out directly. He asked whether Peters raised the same concerns in 2016 when the United States dropped tens of thousands of bombs across multiple countries. He asked whether anyone on that side of the aisle objected when military action was taken in Syria in 2013. He asked what specific threat Syria or Libya posed to the United States that justified those actions under the same constitutional framework Peters was now invoking against a president from the opposing party. Those are not rhetorical questions. They are substantive ones, and the absence of any comparable outcry during those moments matters enormously to the credibility of the argument being made now. The legal framework Mullin outlined is not a partisan invention. The War Powers Resolution, passed in 1973, requires the president to notify Congress within 48 hours of committing armed forces to a conflict. It then provides a window of 60 to 90 days during which the president can continue operations before being required to seek specific congressional authorization or withdraw forces. That framework has been the operative standard for every military action taken by every president since its passage. It has been criticized by constitutional scholars on both sides of the debate. But it is the law as it currently exists, and it was followed in this instance. Mullin also raised the question that sits at the center of the entire policy debate, which is the specific nature of the threat that Iran has represented to the United States and its interests for nearly half a century. This is where the conversation shifts from procedural to substantive, and where the stakes become impossible to minimize. Iran has been a state sponsor of organizations responsible for the deaths of American service members and civilians since 1979. That is not a contested fact. The progression from the hostage crisis to decades of proxy warfare, through direct attacks on American personnel, represents one of the longest sustained hostile relationships between any two nations in the modern era. The question of what to do about a regime actively pursuing nuclear capability against that backdrop is one of the most consequential strategic questions any president can face. Mullin's argument was not that military action should be taken without accountability. His argument was that a president who acts decisively against a threat that has been building for nearly 5 decades, who follows the legal notification requirements that exist, and who does so with a clear strategic rationale, deserves something other than immediate accusations of constitutional overreach from senators who were silent when similar or greater force was used by previous administrations. That argument deserves engagement on its merits. The response it received was not engagement. It was procedural deflection dressed up as principled concern. There is a genuine constitutional debate to be had about the scope of executive war powers. Legal scholars have been having it for decades. The founders did intend for Congress to be the body that formally commits the nation to war. They also created an executive branch with the obligation and the authority to defend American interests when threats materialize faster than legislative deliberation allows. The tension between those two truths has never been fully resolved and probably never will be. What is not a genuine contribution to that debate is invoking the Constitution selectively, applying it only when the person in the Oval Office belongs to the opposing party, and then calling the response politics when someone points out the inconsistency. Mullin ended his remarks by asking a question that the chamber had no clean answer to. Should the regime that spent 47 years sponsoring attacks against Americans, funding proxies that killed American soldiers, and pursuing nuclear capability have been left in place indefinitely because the timing of action did not follow a preferred procedural sequence? That is the actual question. Everything else in that exchange was noise around it. The answer to that question is not simple. Reasonable people with serious national security credentials disagree about the best approach to Iran, but the disagreement should be about strategy, about long-term stability in the region, about the costs and benefits of various courses of action. It should not be about whether the president had the legal authority to act, because that question was answered clearly and on the record in that hearing room. If this gave you something to think about, hit that like button right now, share this with someone who wants the full picture, and make sure you subscribe because the conversations happening in those Senate chambers have consequences that reach every American household, and we are not going to stop covering them. See you in the next one.